I do it. And I do it because I want my kids to live in the same world and have the same opportunities that I've had, and their kids, my grandchildren, to have the same. That's why I do what I do. It's why I've been an environmentalist for so long. It's because I want this world to be the same for our kids and their kids. And I often put a photograph of my boys on as the last picture on a slide deck, saying, and the question is, and the spray on the screen is, what's your why? And that's my why. It's for my kids. It's why I do what I do.
Hello and welcome to a Transformed Life podcast. I am your host, Tiffani Cappello, and I have a wonderful guest with us today, Glenn Conley. He is a sustainability specialist. Glenn is an experienced specialist who has been fortunate enough to work in large organizations throughout his entire career, providing him with detailed knowledge and skills required to implement strategic sustainability frameworks in complex organizations. He's proud to have been a positive influencer in driving sustainable outcomes and leaving a legacy for his children and grandchildren. Now, as well as a 20-year career in corporate sustainability, Glenn is also a qualified neuro-leadership coach, rapid transformational therapist, and a certified hypnotherapist like me. Glenn has a great gift of insight, both inward and towards others. And he's often been told that he has an aura that draws people in. And honestly, I know Glenn and I've experienced that aura myself. So his mission is to share this with people and to help them move past their blockages. And today, Glenn and I will be talking about how you can help your children with climate fears. We all know a lot of children nowadays are terrified of the future. They have to worry that maybe the earth won't be there for them or it won't be livable. This is what they're hearing all the time at school and in the media. And they can develop a terribly negative attitude, a terrified attitude on what the future holds for them. So Glenn is going to help us as parents know how we can move our kids past those fears and help them to become part of the solution. So we have a really interesting discussion ahead of us. So hello, Glenn. I am so happy to see you. How are you today?
Yeah. Hi, Tiffani. I'm fantastic. It's
And
real honor to be
the
here.
listeners will notice his fabulous Australian accent. And tell us where you're from, Glenn.
So I actually am Australian, but I live in New Zealand. So I live in Auckland, and I've been here for 8 years now. Although apparently I still sound like an Aussie, which is good.
Yeah,
So,
and I could listen to your accent all day, even if you didn't have anything interesting to say, but I know that you have plenty of interesting things to say. And I will just tell the listeners how I met Glenn. We actually met in LA at one of Marissa Peer's training. I was a trainer there. He was a student, and Glenn is now a rapid transformational therapist. But he wears many hats. So tell us about your other hats, Glenn.
yeah, thanks, Tiffany. So my corporate career is in sustainability. I'm a sustainability professional, have been for more than 20 years now. I studied a master's in environmental management, and my undergrad was in uh, physiology and aquatic science. And my honours was in aquatic physiology. So I've worked for 20 years with large corporations, just really pushing them to be accountable for their performance environmentally. So in that part of that 20 years, I was an external auditor, and I would go into organisations and give certification to environmental management system standard, international global standard, ISO 14000. So I had a real privilege, I guess, to be able to hold these guys accountable to what they were doing to the environment. And that was a real honor for me. And it helps me with purpose, and my purpose around that is about leaving a legacy for my kids, and their kids, I guess. And so I felt that I actually had a first-hand opportunity to make a difference, and that sort of led into my transitioning career now, as I'm turning 50, to help to focus on helping individual people through healing, which is, I feel like I'm a bit done with corporate, and the time now has come for me to focus on individuals and how I can help them to heal through their trauma.
And I think this is so important. I'll tell you why, why I've had you on the show. This is a very important topic to me, the environment. And the reason for that is because 30 years ago, I gave birth to a child with multiple birth defects. It was a direct result of a chemical exposure from a company that had a practice in place that should not have been there. The consumer was not protected. The employees were probably not protected. And as a result, I lost a child, as well as my ex-husband undergoing some illness for a short period of time. So at that time, once I saw the geneticist and we were able to piece together the cause of my daughter's birth defect and subsequent death as a result, I became an avid environmentalist. I read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. I understood the problem of environmental exposures and birth defects. I was involved a little bit in the March of Dimes. So I wanted to ensure that going forward, I had healthy kids, and I've had 6 healthy kids. So that's wonderful. Wow. But I didn't want any parents to have to lose kids. So I just really dived into that world of learning about the chemicals that were causing health issues. And I was shocked to find out that a lot of these corporations know that the chemicals and environmental exposures that they are putting out into the world do cause health issues, do cause birth defects and genetic issues, and yet they seem to deliberately alter their research to keep protecting that bottom line of profit. So it's important to me that there are people out there in the world who are holding these corporations accountable and caring about the legacy that we leave our kids, because I'm sure you've noticed, as many of our listeners have, that the health of people here in the United States, as well as in Australia and Europe, is degenerating for many reasons. But one of those reasons is that we are constantly exposed to a large degree of environmental chemicals that affect our bodies and our environment, and also the climate. So so it's a huge, super important topic. But then later, as I became a therapist, I began to notice an additional problem related to what you do for a living. I see a lot of teenagers in my private practice here, and I noticed a general sense of hopelessness because they do have knowledge of what's going on in the environment. They hear it on the news, and the news kind of paints things very negatively because that's how they get viewership. And they hear it from their parents, they're hearing it at school, and the messages they're getting about what's going on in the environment, what's going on with climate change, are really negative. And those messages are causing a great deal of hopelessness, discouragement, and fear and anxiety in kids. I see it so frequently that I've just become very alarmed and concerned. And it's one of the reasons I decided to have you as a guest today, because I like your approach to having a positive attitude towards what's going on in the world, not a blind optimism that does not acknowledge the negatives that we still need to work through, but just the importance of helping our kids navigate this environment we are now in, where we do have some very real and legitimate concerns. So, my first question to you is, it's always bad news coming out of the media. So I just want you to share with me what's some of the good news? What's going on in the world of climate change and environmental policy, and in the work that you have done that is promising?
Okay, it's actually really promising. The IPCC put out a report last year, maybe the year before, saying that all of the technology exists to halve climate emissions by 2030. It already exists.
Okay,
All
I
we
did not know that.
Yeah. So that's interesting, right? So you don't even realize this, and this is a passion for you. So this is what the type of message we need to be telling our kids is that, you need to be filtering what you're hearing, and I follow a number of different, news blogs, which are actually positive news reporting. Uh, and it's the news you didn't hear. And there's one which I'm going to put a plug in. I don't have anything to do with these guys, but it's called Future Crunch. These guys, they're a couple of Australians, and I saw them on stage at an environment conference, and these guys are just powerful, and they're spreading good news stories, and it's all about health, environment, climate change, because there isn't enough good news out there for people to actually grab onto. People just think, as you say, you know, that it's just all doom and gloom, and we're all, destined for the world to end. It's not the truth, you know. And in
Well,
my corporate,
yeah, go ahead, Glenn. I'm sorry.
yeah, in my corporate job, I'm constantly challenging the executive at the organization that I now work for about the improvements that we're making on a day-to-day basis. We're making decisions. We've changed, I think, 40% of our fleet to EV now. Our car fleet, and we are generating our own electricity rather than taking electricity from the grid. And we just have these fantastic processes in place, which the next people who will come into this organization and run it will benefit from, and the community that we work in, because I work for a public utility, is
Okay.
benefiting from it directly. So it's really about some of the stuff that's actually happening out there. So as well as the technology being available, there's things like the B team. This is massive corporations globally who have signed up to these environmental commitments and are actually making positive change. And it's about trying to get this type of information out to these kids to say, there are people in this world who have influence, who are doing the right things, rather than actually what the news is doing, which is sensationalizing the bad things that are happening.
And even me understanding the need for this positive input into the narrative that we are being told. We're not hearing the positive narrative. I mean, I was searching for it, Glenn, because I wanted to be able to help my young clients have a positive view of the future. But honestly, everywhere I looked, it was just negative. And I even got to the point when I'm working with these young clients and seeing this negativity, I'm putting forth the effort to find information I could present them that was positive. And in the effort of looking for that information, I'm getting discouraged. I'm
Yeah,
thinking,
well,
I'm thinking, oh my God, there's no solutions. And there's a whole bunch of people out there who are pushing that message. There's no hope. There's no solutions. We're all going to be dead by 2050. And I get these young people in there and they'll sit down and they'll say, I'm anxious and depressed. And I just, my mom's complaining because I want to play computer games and sleep and I don't want to go to college. And I'll say, what do you want to do with your future? And I get the same message. Well, I don't know. What's the point? Don't want to bring kids into this terrible world. And we're all going to be dead in 2050. And I was struggling, I can switch their mindset, but I was struggling to point them to positive solutions. And I did not know that the technology already existed to solve the climate problems. I
absolutely.
just thought it just doesn't exist. What are we going to do? But I'm trying to help these kids from that standpoint, struggling myself. And this is why when I talked to you about it, and I heard the positivity that you were able to have, I said, I got to talk to this guy so that other people can hear the truth.
Yeah, well, I mean, this IPCC report, I'll send you the link. You can put it in your show notes,
Awesome.
so people can see it for themselves. This is from the International Panel on Climate Change. You know, it's a published report. But what we need is the commitment from organisations and individuals who have got the mind power, I guess, to actually implement this technology and to make the change that all of the society needs. And I guess it's people like myself who push the corporate environment to actually adopt new technology and shift. I work in this environment that we don't do things because we're afraid of failure. So we set up an innovation program which is about it's safe to fail, right? So without trialing new technology and the new way of doing things, we're not going to learn. And this is, I think, where the problem is with corporate world, is that there's such a risk aversion to trialing new technology and the new way of doing stuff. And that's where I'm really finding influence. And it's fortunate that I am who I am, because for me, I get trust from people because they know who I am as an individual. And then I'm giving them recommendations for things they can do, and they actually run with it. And we're getting the wins. So it's fantastic. So I've now worked for two large corporates and done 2030 net zero decarbonisation roadmaps for these two organisations. And the current one I'm in now, it's going to come at a cost of 420 million. But that's a massive investment, and that's where the issue is that we've got to get these corporations, putting their money where their mouth is, because they say, and we hear all about greenwashing all the time. Well, let's actually have a look under the hood and see what's happening in the background, and what are the real changes that are happening inside organizations. One of the commitments we've got at work is that we've just committed to reducing our embodied carbon in all of our infrastructure by 40% by 2024. So we've got an $18 billion infrastructure program, right? And in that $18 billion spend, we're going to reduce the carbon that's built into that infrastructure. So this is like, so using low carbon cement, for example, or building less. So do we actually need to have that particular asset in that location, or can we build around it another way and reduce the amount that we're building to start with? And then once we've built this piece of kit, how's it going to operate in a net zero world? That thinking is now in place in corporates, or maybe in corporates who are committed to the climate, and it takes individuals like me and like your listeners and their kids to actually shift the dial for corporations to say, this is possible and this is the way you can do it.
Now, why do you think it is that the media is not putting this good news out? I mean, it just floors me. Obviously, there's something to be gained by sensationalizing, creating outrage. And many people are familiar with the media tactics, but I don't think they realize how much they're harming our kids. And a lot of it is even filtering down from the parents. Now, I think there's a distinct difference in how people of different generations view climate change. Because in the older citizens, I think there tends to be more of a disbelief anyway, but also an issue of just, well, I'm not going to be around anyway. I mean, I hear a lot of that. But for these kids, they're just starting out in life. And if you're 20 years old in today's day, and you hear that the world might be ending by 2050, what's the point? And they're not hearing this news. And I think a lot of it has to do with the parents are not hearing the news either. So when their children come to them with climate change fears and anxiety, they don't even know what to say. So some of them will just debunk it entirely. Some of the parents are just caught in that web of despair themselves. So why do you think it is this news that you're giving us today, that we actually have all the technology we need to create this sustainability, to create a world that's safe and healthy for us to live in, and it's not getting out there?
Well, I think, as you said, that we all know that bad news sells, right? And we have this, as individuals, we have this predisposition to focusing on the negative. I don't know what the stats are, and there is a figure that gets sprouted around our mind and the percentage of negative thoughts that we focus on as opposed to positive thoughts, because that's the way that we've been conditioned since birth. Because we've been conditioned to live in fear out of survival, right? So we both know that the mind's primary objective is to keep us alive. And so what's it going to do? It's going to protect us from what's harmful to us, and I think that's got a lot to do with it, is that people want to know how they can be harmed. And so that's what they're focusing on, so I think that's probably what, the main reason is that we all love a bad news story. I mean, everyone stops and has a look at a car accident. It's just
Yeah.
toxic. I don't do that. I drive past and I feel sorry for the person who's been involved. So I think it's about mindset. I think it's about we choose we choose our focus, right? And I think in terms of the generations, you're absolutely correct. My grandmother is a climate denier. I cannot believe it. The people in this day and age when we have got so much, the science is in, right? It's indisputable that the climate is changing as a result of humans' activities on this earth, and they just blindly ignore that because they don't want to admit that they're part of the problem. And I think that's what it comes down to for a climate denier. So for me in my own life, I'm not a deep green. I still fly around the world and travel, but I offset my travel because I know that offsetting my travel actually does work. That these airlines don't, it's not just another money making avenue for an airline to offset. They actually invest in carbon removals, and they're audited against that. They're held to account. And I've been one of those people that holds these organizations to account. So I know that there is actually integrity behind it.
Yeah.
So
some of these corporations really are interested in creating a sustainable future. Would you say that's true?
absolutely. I mean, a great
What
place to start.
percentage of people that you're approaching to work with? I know it's a rough idea number to throw out, but what do you think the percentage is when you're looking at these larger corporations? Because I think a lot of environmentalists look at large corporations as just plain evil. I read Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring. I've, seen the movie Radon Girls, and you see so much out there about, they don't care about us. It's all about money grubbing and profit and growth. But that's not always the case, is it?
No, I think that I think there's been a massive shift since COVID. I think COVID has, and I know this, we're not talking about that, but it changed the priority for people. So, and for organizations. And, organizations have always had like a health and safety team and a focus on that, but it was almost like it was just lip service, it was just a tick box activity that we were doing. But I think that well-being became paramount for all of us during COVID. We had workplaces who were losing staff, who were dying because of COVID, and suddenly it was almost like a shift that the universe needed to have. I don't know, how to express it, but I, firmly believe that the society, industrialization and, this corporate greed, and everything was about shareholder profit for these corporations. Everything suddenly wasn't important because people were dying, and I think there's been a massive shift. So now I work, in a hybrid role. So I'll go into the office a couple of days a week, here or there. And the office it's almost like a ghost town because everyone's realized what's more important for them, and what's more important for them is to get their job done in working however they want to. And it's about the output of their job. What's the outcome of your work? So there's nothing worse than presenteeism. We both know that you don't want to sit at your desk for the sake of sitting at your desk, and corporates woken up to that now as a result of the pandemic. They had to put these processes in place so that people can continue to work and continue to get their job, because that not only meets their bottom line, but it also gives us as individuals purpose. You know, And I found that there's been a big shift since COVID, and corporations actually do care, and they want. I'm seeing, more and more now that well-being of people is actually being put before profit, which is great.
And I think too, another thing that happened with COVID is the social isolation put many people who are sort of on the brink of, having severe anxiety and depression. It sort of pushed some of those people off the edge. And so mental health became a huge focus, and people are starting to think about what they're thinking because there wasn't all these distractions. Now they have to think about what they're thinking, and they're realizing to a large degree how negative their thinking is. They're starting to take a look at the social issues around them. And I think that people became more aware of what's really valuable in life, like you said, our families, people, our health, our environment. And so I really think that there was a shift. You're right. But I think too that we started to become aware that as people, as citizens, we can make a difference in our choices,
Absolutely. I mean, I did a new starter induction last week. And these are these bright-eyed, you know, kids almost coming into the organization and they were absolutely excited about what I'm feeling more and more is that we're getting staff because of our sustainability agenda. So I'm fortunate that we are seen as being leaders in sustainability globally. So, I work in water and wastewater treatment, and we are doing world leading innovation. So at the moment, for example, and I'll come back to this new starters, where we've got this project where we're monitoring. We've fabricated these hoods, gas hoods, and we're directly measuring the greenhouse gases being emitted off the top of a wastewater treatment pond. Because up until now, we've only ever had these estimates based on standards that came out from the IPCC in 2006 and just got updated in 2019. But they're still just guesstimates, right? So we're doing direct monitoring, and we're spending millions on this, and this is innovative, and it's going to actually inform the water sector globally. So in the last week, I've spoken to people in the US, in Belgium, in London, all around the work we're doing in this space. So the new starters coming in, we're telling them that this is what we're doing, and they're just like, wow. But then I say, but you know what? It all starts with you as an individual. So every single choice, you can do one thing per day. And what is the one thing that you can do? And think about the one thing that you can do as an individual that is positive for the climate. So maybe I don't print that page. Maybe I look at it on my pad. Maybe I remember to turn my PC off when I leave the office at the end of the day. Maybe I choose to buy an electric car over a petrol car because in New Zealand, there's free charging for electric vehicles, so outside the home. And there's rebates inside the home for people who own EVs. You've got off-peak free charging available. So that, we're being incentivized to make these good choices. But it does start with you, and so at home for me with my own kids, they love the fact that we drive an EV. They'll drive around. I mean, and they're absolutely. I mean, I'm currently driving a Polestar, which I love, and we're going to trial a BYD next, and then a Tesla. And the kids are excited about that. They're absolutely mad. They're hooked on YouTube Tesla videos, and they can sell the things because they know so much about them. So this is energy, but they don't have any interest in fuel driven cars and combustion engine. So yeah.
And I'm guessing that your kids are not getting a negative message. So they probably feel hopeful. And one of the most important things that people need, all people, not just young people, is they need to have a sense of agency. When you feel like your entire life is being pushed in a direction that you can't control, and we often feel like that if we listen to the news, not just on the environmental front, but economics, politics, social policies, But when you have that sense of agency, that there is something I can do, there's something I can do to make a difference. And what I'm doing is actually making a difference. And I feel like you're doing that for your kids. And what else do you do with your kids just to make sure that they're not having anxiety? I mean, what sort of message are you presenting? What are you sharing with them?
Yeah, I've got so my both my boys are autistic. I've got these 10-year-old autistic sons, and so they're very matter of fact. Both of them very black and white. They follow routine and they're regimented. So for me, I'm able to limit their exposure. They don't watch the news. I don't watch the news. So we actually live. I get the news that I want to get online, and I can filter that, but I don't expose them to news, because I find that if they hear about a news story or a negative news story, they'll focus on that. So just this week, New Zealand has been hit by a cyclone, and it's been the biggest cyclone that it's had in a century or whatever. And we didn't actually mention the word cyclone to the kids, but then they heard it through school, and so then they obsessed about it. So when they were obsessing about it, it's about bringing them back to this house, and that we were safe. We're above, we're high up, and it's protected, and the cyclone's passed now, and we've got beautiful weather again, and we weren't impacted at all by it. And so I was able to get them to focus on the fact that they were safe, and just bring themselves, each of them, back to their room, which is their sanctuary, and that in their sanctuary, it's their space. It looks like a 10-year-old kid's room. There's stuff everywhere, and they're chalk and cheese, the two of them. One of them is, very tidy, the other one's an absolute mess. And we just let them be themselves in that space, because that's their space. We there's often we'll go to the bedroom and the door will be shut and there'll be a handwritten note in the door saying, "Do not enter, no parents allowed," whatever. It's great, and we respect that. And by showing them that respect, and that empowers them, right? It gives them that autonomy. And this afternoon, we're heading off on a family weekend away, and they're super excited about that. But we'll go, and we're flying, and yes, I've opted their flights, but going through the airport, they'll be independent. They'll do all of it. They can probably fly there by themselves now. But this is just about me encouraging them to get out there and get amongst it, and they see us having fun, and I don't hold them back. They're both once a week we go to high dive, and they're learning the high dive, and they love it. And Thursday night, Finn did his first ever forward flip off the 3-meter board.
Wow, I can't do that.
I can't even look at it. I'm so afraid. And he's doing the somersaults of it. So this is because we encouraged him. Before Christmas, he was having meltdowns on the end of the platform. He was having like proper meltdowns, screaming, and had to get off the thing because he couldn't cope with the anxiety. And here he is, what, 2 months later, and he's doing forward flips off the thing. So,
confidence is built when we face challenges and we overcome them. And so every time he masters something like that, his confidence is going to increase.
Absolutely.
And I think it's one of the most important jobs a parent has, is to build the confidence of their children, not just in their ability to handle these challenges that you're providing your kids with opportunities to, navigate, but to feel like they are strong enough inside themselves to be able to navigate the challenges that are out in the world as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, they've got fantastic tools and supports in around them that help them to actually overcome, their fear. So it's one of the biggest fears that each of them have got is they're sensitive to sirens. So if we have a fire drill, they will have a meltdown. So they've got, each of them has got earmuffs like that they can grab, and they've also got a buddy. So in their classrooms, they've got a buddy who will come to them in the event that there's a drill to keep them safe, and they know that that gives them some certainty that they're going to be safe in that situation, and that they can handle it. And the other thing we're doing is we're exposing them to it. So if I have a fire drill at work, I record it on my video. I record on my phone. I record the whole thing. From the whoop whoop going at the sirens to the a couple of hundred people piling down the staircase to get out of the building and going to muster at the muster point. So my kids watch that in awe at the way that the adults are responding to the fire drill. And from them, they're realizing that this is how we respond when this thing that we hate and this thing that we're afraid of happens. And it's becoming safe for them. It's becoming more normal, for them to.
And it's about conscious parenting. You're making a conscious effort to address the fears of your children. And you're making a conscious effort not to make sure those fears don't get instilled in them. Now, here in the US, I think for a lot of kids, the fears aren't being instilled necessarily by the parents, but by these outside forces, because there's so much going on in social media. And social media directs the information that your child is interested in. So if they become interested in climate change, for the most part, and they're on social media, the message they're getting is we're doomed, And so parents consciously making an effort to show the good news to their children, to give them that sense of safety. Because you think about it, 300 years ago, if you were a child growing up in the world, you knew what happened in your own community. You knew what happened in your own locale. You didn't know about people starving in Africa. You didn't know about the train crash over here. And you didn't have images of horror flashing on the media. And what we forget as parents is that kids' brains, their psychology, their emotions, is not fully developed yet. And while we can watch that and handle it, the child can't necessarily make sense of that, and it brings an incredible amount of fear. So we're responsible to protect their mindset so that they do feel like my world is a safe place. Because you're right with what you said earlier, we have a negativity bias, and the brain, in an effort to keep us safe, is going to point out the negatives. And that you get exposed to too much of that, and what settles in is that nervous system dysregulation of constantly feeling like this world is an unsafe place. And when you have the belief that the world is a terribly unsafe place, that people are generally bad, or we're all going to die in 30 years, when a kid adopts these beliefs and takes it in, it's going to cause depression and anxiety, because ultimately depression and anxiety really do stem from what we believe about ourselves, about life, about the world we live in. And this is why I chose to have you on, because I want people to understand what you understand. There are positive solutions. We have them available, and there are plans to implement these solutions, and everything is not all doom and gloom. And one of the most important beliefs that I try to instill in my clients, as well as my own kids, is that every problem really does have a solution. I believe that. Okay. And sometimes that solution is external, and sometimes that solution is internal, but when we teach kids that there are solutions out there, they begin to focus not on the problems and the negativity. They begin to focus on the solutions. And then they actually realize, I can be a part of the solution. And what kind of things do you do around your home to teach your kids to be a part of that solution? Just those day-to-day activities. And you mentioned, you have made the decision to drive an electric car, and your kids are proud of that. And they probably very well understand why you've made that decision. But what other sorts of ways do you alter your just day-to-day life and the choices you make, purchasing and living, just to be able to make your kids feel like they have a sense of agency, that they're doing something to secure their own futures?
Uh, I guess I do lots of things. Um, when they're finished with clothes and toys and the like, it goes to charity. So they know that we have minimal waste going out to the landfill. So they're aware of waste, and we do waste separation. So we've got soft plastics, we've got organics, we've got hard plastics, and we've got landfill. And the landfill bin goes out probably once a fortnight, and it's only a small, 100 litre bin, so it's not a big bin. So and each of them is responsible for helping. They've got a on the front of the fridge, they've got like a chart, which is their, and I don't call it chores, I call it their jobs. So it's a job board. And and each of them has got 3 jobs that they have to do per week. And one of them will be to take the bins out, and one might be to set the table for the family, and one of them might be to help cook. So this is what they do. At the end of the week, each of them will check off on the sheet that they've done the jobs for the week, and then they get paid, which is what we probably knew as pocket money, but they actually earn it. And if they don't do all the jobs, they don't get a full pay. And they get, because it's the same as anybody else, right? And then they get $1 each per year of age. And then when they get that money, they have to separate that into 3 jars. One jar is called a smile jar, and that's for their long-term savings. So one of them has bought a new Nintendo controller for himself. The second one is a splurge jar. So that's if they want to go down the shop and buy a bag of lollies, or they want to go down a time zone and hit the arcade. That's fine. That's where that comes from. The third jar is called the giving jar. And at the end of the year, they have to use that money to give it to somebody else who hasn't got what they've got. So and that might just be that I think they buy a gift to put under the giving tree. Or a couple of years ago, there was a call out on a podcast that I followed for anyone who could give financial help, and the kids did that. They gave money to strangers, So I'm instilling that behavior in them now, that they know that there are people, less fortunate than themselves, that they can help by giving money to, which is great. It's really good. And like the 3 jar thing with them, it's up to them how they split the money. I give them that agency to do what they want with it. But the one rule is that every week they had to put money into all 3 jars, and it's up to them how much they split it. So that's really cool. They also see me, I'm one of these guys that driving down into school each day, there's always a rough sleeper standing on a corner with a board asking for money, you know. And as I'm driving into the intersection, I've got the window down, I've got the coin, I'm rummaging through the console finding the coins, and I give them the coins. And the boys see that, and they actually comment now about the fact that, that I do that, and their other parent doesn't do it. So it's that's I'm leading by example, I guess. And the other thing that I do personally is that once a week I volunteer on a mobile laundry service for the homeless. So I drive this van, and it's got 2 washers and dryers in the back and a shower. And I took the kids with me on a shift, and they saw just that act of giving to others. So I guess I'm leading by example. I mean, I've still got heaps I can do from, I'm not perfect either. It sounds like I've got this, I'm this sort of.
But you're helping to inoculate your kids against anxiety and depression, because especially with depression, it comes just with a sense of hopelessness and purposelessness. And when people feel like there's nothing that I can do about problems, whether they're internal problems or whether they're problems in the world, that's when that depression sets in. And that's what I'm seeing. And I think the important thing that parents really need to do is to focus their children on being a part of the solution, presenting to them the good news. We actually have the technology right now to solve these climate problems. We are, we have solutions, and you as this young person growing up, you get to be a part of these solutions and the day-to-day choices you make. I know in my own family, I have made some choices that some people actually think are quite radical. Like I try to avoid buying plastic. I know it's not entirely possible, but I just try to avoid it as much as possible. And some of that is for my own health, and some of that is just to be an example. And I do like to thrift shop. I do like to donate my clothes. I do like to do these things. And then I think the biggest thing is my support of sustainable agriculture. So to try to buy local, to try to buy food that's produced by farmers and growers that are rebuilding the soil. They're minimizing their use of chemicals and chemical fertilizers. So there's all these solutions out there, and teaching your child about those solutions, helping them to know how to implement that, gives them that sense of empowerment. And it's hard to be afraid when you're in that place of empowerment. It's moving into empowerment sort of naturally helps to dissipate the anxiety that may be infiltrating their mind from teachers, media, from just the negativity. There's almost like a negative energy surrounding it, sometimes a feeling of doom and hopelessness. And I think some of even the environmental activists, they're very concerned about health and human well-being, and they should be. But I think sometimes they even come across with a hopeless message, and it scares young people.
I think it's important not to be, you know, you know, too much of a idealist. I'm very pragmatic, and I'm not saying that this world isn't changing, because it definitely is. As I just said, we've just experienced our first cyclone in a century in New Zealand, and we had a major flooding event only a month earlier. So the climate is definitely changing. That's not at all, what I'm talking about. I think that it's about the fact that, and as we've discussed for the purpose of this podcast, is that there is things we can do about it. And so for me with my kids, they know that we can drive an EV. We can choose to drive an EV, and they know about turning off the lights when they leave a room, and they know to turn off the telly at the end of the day if they're watching TV. And I'm limiting they know what about screen time, and they know the impact that too much screen time has on them, because when it happens and they have a meltdown or they have a blowout because they've lost their regulation because they've had their head in a game for a couple of hours, they're smart enough now to recognize that that's actually impacting them, so which is good. You talk about plastics. I'm the same. I've got all glass containers in the cupboard. And this is just knowledge. But for me, it's because I've taught myself, and I have a sister who's a naturopath, and so it's in my family. It's in our DNA. This healthy living and just this reducing our exposure to chemicals. I'm lucky that I can afford to spend the money to buy organic food, and I know the difference. And the kids come with me to the store, and they know the difference themselves. I'm teaching that to them now, that they understand, where food comes from. For so long we've talked with them about the where food comes from, and then we put a veggie garden out the back, and that they have a responsibility to keep, and so it's dead. But it's about it's about like letting them know that food doesn't come from the store, that it actually comes from the earth, and so we have to respect that earth and take care of it.
And I think what some parents do, because they don't want their kids to be anxious, or they know their kids are going to be anxious, they don't tell them the truth either, like you mentioned. We can't pretend there's not a problem either. We can point out the actual problems. We can point out the solutions that are there, and we can point out how they can become a part of that solution as you're doing. But I think there can be two extremes, and going to the opposite extreme, because humans seem to love pendulums. They just keep swinging to extremes, and so the other extreme of pretending there's not a problem at all in any aspect of the environment, and all chemicals are safe, and we could eat whatever processed foods we want, and we could continue to live these unsustainable lives with no consequence, that's equally as irresponsible as a parent as terrorizing our children with all the negative effects, or allowing them to be endlessly exposed to negativity through the media as well. And I think
Yeah,
parents do it because sometimes they just don't know what to do. So I'm not here to make anybody feel guilty. Oh my God, I'm an irresponsible parent. It's not that. It's about educating yourself on how to handle these. This is not an easy problem. It's a complex problem. And some of the solutions are complex, but they are out there. And that's what's important for people to know. And I think that's what most people, at least most young people that I'm seeing, they don't realize that.
yeah. We had this massive, we had this massive movement in New Zealand a few years ago where the students were marching. The kids were marching on the streets, and I'm sure it was global as well. It was all. I think it all sort of stemmed from like Greta Thunberg, but it our kids, they were young at the time. They were only 6 or 7 years old, and so they were quite impressionable. But we were cautious with how we exposed them to that, because there are different ways to address an issue, and I think that if individuals feel that they don't have a hope, or they don't have an opportunity to make a difference, then okay, I understand that they can come together as a collective and make a statement. And it actually did have a positive impact in New Zealand. We have now got the Zero Carbon Act come into force, which requires organisations to reduce their emissions. It's actually legislated in New Zealand now. So this is why I have hope for our future generations, because we are taking actions now that will actually impact our future generation. But for my kids, it was more the safety element of it that I was concerned about them getting trampled. And this, and they said that I didn't stop their exposure to it. So they knew that it was happening and they knew what it was about, but I kept them safe from it because they were little kids. So it's a balancing act for us. We as a parent, we've got this responsibility to care for our kid and take care of their well-being. And sometimes that means not hiding the truth from them. So to get really personal, I went through a relationship breakdown about 3 years ago. And the boys know exactly what happened in their relationship. They know exactly why their relationship ended. And it's been easier for me to move forward in my life with them, who also obviously went through the relationship breakdown, being aware of the reason for that. So I think it's important that we don't try and shelter our kids too much either, because otherwise they're not going to develop the skills that they're going to need to cope with those situations in their own lives as they grow up.
And I think that's a really important point, because I don't know how many people know, but I come out of a religious cult. And one of the things that happen within a religious cult is it's about isolating you from the outside world so you won't be, so-called tempted or whatever. But we were sheltered from the reality of society and life. This was encouraged. And then the message within was negative too, which wasn't really good. But and as parents, we were encouraged to shelter our kids from any negative reality. And what happened was a lot of these kids grew up, and then they have to go out in the real world and get a job, and they are not equipped to handle life in the real world. So if we over shelter our kids and pretend like there aren't any real world problems, and then at one point they have to go out into that world and they are completely swallowed up by reality, and they end up having a tremendous amount of anxiety. So it's about letting them know what the real problems are, but letting them know there are solutions. And if there aren't solutions, letting them know that those solutions can be found. And that's where there's just an element of positivity. I just firmly believe that. I believe there are solutions when we we can use technology, we can use innovation, we can use ingenuity and creativity, and we could find solutions. So I'm certain that there are not solutions for every single issue that can be pointed out or that our kids will come home with, but those solutions are there. And if we look at currently some of the issues that we're facing that we now have solutions for, just even antibiotics, how many lives have been saved by antibiotics? There was a problem for many years. If you got some people who would die of even a minor infection, babies were dying at a very young age. These were problems that no one had a solution for, but a solution was developed. So even though there doesn't appear to be a solution now, we can still work towards the development of that solution. But if we don't believe there's a solution at all, and we believe everything's hopeless, we're not looking. And that's a huge problem I see with people, who are depressed and anxious. And when I suffered from depression and anxiety, I was depressed because I could see a multitude of problems before me. And in my mind, none of them had solutions. And so that was very overwhelming and negative to me. And worse, I believed that I wasn't capable of finding the solutions if they happened to be out there, or developing those solutions. So letting them understand that there's always going to be problems that we need to solve, but you are strong enough, wise enough, and you can find the resources you need to navigate in this world. Because there is a difference between how an anxious person thinks and how a confident person thinks. And anxious people tell themselves repeatedly, I can't handle this. I can't stand it. I don't know what to do. There's thought processes going on in their brain of powerlessness. And as parents, we could instill that into our kids when we look at world events. We don't even realize we're doing it because we feel that we're having those same sorts of negative thought processes. So it behooves us to model that to our kids. Life is not perfect. And sometimes our kids are going to say, Mom, look at this situation in the world. What can I do about that? And I'll be like, you know what? I don't know. But I know, well, what if it comes here? Problem A, problem B. And it's like, well, then we'll figure it out because you're strong, you're wise, you're resourceful, you're intelligent, giving them that sense of confidence that you can handle whatever comes in life, whether it's personally or on a broader scale, is so incredibly important. But we have to have the knowledge first. Okay. If all we're receiving is that negative message that there's these problems and there's no solution. And the thing that frustrates me is that I'm learning from you, from other people, the solution's actually there.
I think there's a lot of what you just have said resonates for me. And for me, all I can do with my boys is model that behavior, and show them that it's possible to find a solution for your problem, whatever your problem is. And so in their lives, if they have a problem that they are overwhelmed by, we work it out together. I don't make it go away for them. They do it themselves. And I think a great example was that diving fear that Finn had. All I did with that was encourage him. I didn't have to show him how to do it because there's no way I was going to get up there either. But
yeah, I'm not doing that either.
But I was able to give him enough confidence that he can do it. And that was because, and the way we did that was we broke it down. He started doing it on the side of the pool, and then he got to the 1 meter and he did it confidently. And then he got into the 3 meter and he started doing other things off the 3 meter. And finally, he introduced his flip. And I don't know who was more surprised, himself or everybody else. But the shift in him has been phenomenal. And he realizes that he can actually change his own world himself. Nobody else has to do it. He's in control of himself. And, you talked before about the sect that you were in and that you were sheltered from the outside world, so you were controlled. And it's everything we're talking about comes down to control, internal and external locus of control. And, how do we as individuals take control of our life and what we're doing in our life on a day-to-day basis? That's all we've got. This external world that we're living in, it might seem that we can't control the changing climate, you know. Well, that's probably right. We can't control the world that we're living in externally, but we can change our contribution to that, through what can we control? Well, I can choose to read a book instead of watching television, or I can choose to segregate my waste, or not put any waste into landfill, to repurpose. I can make choices. I can choose to eat organic food over not, or I can choose to grow a plant in my backyard as opposed to not, for me. But other people might not have those same choices, you know. But what are the actions that they can choose? And every single individual on this planet can make a choice that's climate positive as opposed to climate negative. It's just about being empowered and having the knowledge of what those actions are, I guess. And so as parents, that's where I feel that we should be really focusing our energy. And I see this in my kids' school. They were in a different school for 2 years, midway through their learning in their primary school, and I took them out of the school because they went backwards. They regressed. That school couldn't support my kids. They've gone back to their original school, which is wonderful. And this school has got, a composting garden at the school, and the kids go out there each day and they harvest the produce, and the boys have got, each of them have got roles where one of them's a bike monitor, for example, where the school's got a shed where everyone brings their old bikes for the kids to use in the lunchtime, and playground. And there's a role one of the boys has taken on as being a bike monitor to police the kids who are getting issued bikes and making sure they're coming back and yada yada yada. So it's these things that they're doing in their day-to-day life which are actually also climate positive. So not only are the kids having fun, but they're learning in motor transport that's cheap and fun and great for the environment. And then we see kids, they live in an inner city and there's a walking bus, so the walking bus. So it's one parent will guide about 50 kids. They're like ducks following its parent, walking to school. But it's teaching kids that you don't have to go to school in a car. You can walk to school if it's close enough for you. So it's these types of things that give me hope, I think, for our kids. And it's interesting. I do a lot of corporate presentations. Yesterday, I presented to a group of Korean social welfare workers. Some of them are actually high up in public service. There was a mayor of a Korean town, for example, was at this presentation, and they were absolutely in awe, I think, at the way that we are managing our wastewater. And for me, the cup filling moment of that presentation was talking about why I do it. And I do it because I want my kids to live in the same world and have the same opportunities that I've had, and their kids, my grandchildren, to have the same. That's why I do what I do. It's why I've been an environmentalist for so long. It's because I want this world to be the same for our kids and their kids. And I often put a photograph of my boys as the last picture on a slide deck, saying, and the question is, and the spray on the screen is, what's your why? And that's my why. It's for my kids. It's why I do what I do. So,
and that's great, because you know what, we all need a why, and kids need a why. And if they don't have a why, and at some age they need to develop that, little children don't need to have a why. They just want to be kids and play innocently. But as they get older, it's part of human development. It's part of growing up into adulthood that you need a purpose and a why. And if you're told, no matter what you do, we're all going to die, it's hard to develop that why. So it's so important, I think, for them to know that I can live my life in such a way that I can make a positive impact on this world and ensure that not only I have a good life, but that I can go on and have children, and those children can have a good life. So it sounds almost like you sort of have a family mission, whether it's written out or not, that there's just a theme of a family mission is we're a team and we live a certain way as this team so that we have this purpose. We're making a difference, not just in our own lives, but you're making a difference on a global scale in the community, and even just by helping the homeless and the unfortunate. And I think that is just an absolutely fabulous mission. But we're just out of time, Glenn, and I just wanted to thank you for being on this podcast. It's been absolutely wonderful having you here. And I've been excited because I learned something about just how there is good news out there. Good news I really wasn't aware of until I've had you on the show, and also getting some real good practical points on how we can just give our kids that hope they need and to inoculate them against all of the fear mongering that's going on in the world today. But tell people how they could get in touch with you if they want to learn more, because you're not just working within sustainability, but you are also a coach and a therapist. And so you're helping people change their mind. How could people learn more about what you do along those lines?
Yeah, thanks, Tiffani. It's early days for me in terms of my marketing as a therapist, but I've set up an Insta page, which is the Glenn Will Therapist. So yeah, look me up there, and you'll see me putting daily posts of whatever I'm up to in my day to day to help heal myself. I'm healing from a PTSD injury, and I'm doing really well with that. So if you feel that I can help you, in your own lives, then by all means, reach out.
So they can kind of watch you as you grow, then, can't they?
Yeah, I'm a real stickler for a morning routine, and I train 6 days a week. I run 3 days and I do weights 3 days a week in the mornings. And in fact, I've got a coaching client now who I'm coaching for her first marathon, which is in July this year. I've done 3 marathons myself, and I don't know how many half marathons. And she's benefiting from me because not only is she getting coaching towards the marathon, we're dealing with blocks in her journey with RTT. So it's fantastic, so it's a real nice package for her.
And that's true, because what most people don't realize is when you look at these external goals, they think the way that I need to achieve these goals is taking these physical action steps. And they often forget that we need to first engage our mindset in the right direction by dealing with the blocks, dealing with instilling in our mind the positive beliefs and thought processes that are going to give us the confidence we need to achieve whatever goal we have. So thank you so much, Glenn, for being here with us today. It was absolutely a pleasure. Thank you for listening to A Transformed Life, the podcast that celebrates personal and professional transformations. I hope that you found inspiration and practical tips to help you on your own transformation journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss out on future episodes. I have some incredible guests lined up, and I want to share their stories with you. I would also appreciate it if you could leave me a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps me to improve and reach more people who need to hear these stories of transformation. So thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of A Transformed Life.